Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. The morning was like any other. The sun slanted across the kitchen tiles, casting warm stripes of light that stretched lazily toward the living room. I cradled my coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my palms, as I watched Clara from the corner of my eye. She moved through our morning routine like a dancer with practiced grace, flipping the page of the newspaper with one hand while tapping at her phone with the other. Her lips curved in a faint smile, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clara had always been beautiful in a way that stopped people mid-sentence. Her dark hair, usually tied in a neat bun for work, had begun to fall loose, tendrils framing her face. But there was something different now, an edge to her movements that pricked at the back of my mind. The lingering scent of her perfume hung in the air, too strong for just another day at the office. "Big meeting today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't look up, just nodded, a lock of hair slipping from behind her ear. "Yeah, long day ahead," she replied. Her tone was breezy, but I caught the tightness in her voice, like a violin string wound too taut. It was subtle, easy to overlook. A stranger might miss it, but after 12 years of marriage, I could read Clara as easily as I could a book. Or at least, I thought I could. I wasn't sure when the doubts had started, only that they had seeped into my mind like water through a crack in the ceiling. Maybe it was the late nights that had become more frequent, the unexplained absences cloaked in vague mentions of work emergencies. Or the way her laughter, once genuine and warm, now sounded rehearsed. Whatever it was, the feeling gnawed at me, a persistent itch beneath my skin. I looked down at my watch and realized I needed to head to the office. The IT sector wasn't known for lenient bosses, and I was already pushing my luck this week. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and moved toward the door. Clara still hadn't looked up from her phone. "Have a good day," I said, pausing for her reply. "You too," she murmured absently, eyes flicking up for just a second. A second was all it took to spot the glimmer of guilt buried deep behind her practiced smile. The drive to work was routine, the hum of the tires on the asphalt a background track to my swirling thoughts. The city passed in a blur, shops opening for the day, cyclists weaving between cars, the traffic lights a rhythmic red-green pulse. I barely noticed when I reached the parking lot of my office building. Work was a welcome distraction. Between coding deadlines and managing server malfunctions, I managed to push Clara's tight smiles and the buzzing silence of our kitchen to the back of my mind. The day slipped by in a flurry of emails, meetings, and troubleshooting, until the sky outside turned a deeper blue and office lights buzzed to life. I was in the middle of compiling code when my phone vibrated. A simple, innocuous text notification from Clara, "Working late. Don't wait up." The words sent a shiver down my spine, though they weren't new. I'd seen this message before, so many times that the letters might as well have been etched into my brain. "Everything okay?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. Greg, one of my team members, leaned against the edge of my cubicle, concern etched across his usually jovial face. "Yeah," I lied, shoving my phone into my pocket. "Just tired, I guess." He nodded, though the crease between his brows said he didn't buy it. I turned back to my screen, fingers typing aimlessly, but my mind had wandered to Clara's text. The office felt suddenly suffocating, the walls pressing in, and I needed air. The elevator ride down was slow, the soft ping of each floor barely registering. Outside, the night air hit me with a rush of cool relief. I leaned against the rough brick of the building, staring out at the city skyline, the buildings lit up like artificial constellations. The silence pressed against me, heavy and persistent. I needed to clear my head. Without really thinking, I found myself walking, each step echoing down the deserted street. Memories of better times, of laughter shared on road trips and cozy nights on the couch, tangled with the growing dread in my chest. My mind cycled through every clue I had ignored, calls cut short when I entered the room, the mysterious shopping trips, and the conversations she never shared anymore. Half an hour later, I found myself outside our favorite cafe, a place Clara and I used to visit during lazy Sundays. The neon sign buzzed softly, casting a warm glow onto the sidewalk. A couple sat by the window, leaning in close, sharing whispered secrets. My gut twisted, and for the first time, I considered that my suspicions weren't just paranoia. When I returned home, the house was dark. I stood in the foyer, keys clutched tight, listening to the silence as it stretched. Her car was still gone, and her absence pressed into the space like a physical weight. I moved through the rooms on autopilot, flipping on lights, searching for clues that didn't exist. My eyes caught on the framed photos along the hallway, Clara and me on our wedding day, beach vacations, candid shots of laughter. Now, they felt like relics from a different life, a life that I wasn't sure was real anymore. As I stepped into the kitchen, my phone vibrated again. It was a notification from the phone bill app, reminding me that the statement was ready for review. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but tonight, it felt like an invitation. Heart pounding, I opened the app and scrolled through the numbers. One stood out immediately, repeated over and over, a Virginia area code. My pulse quickened as I matched the timestamps to nights Clara said she was working late. The pattern was unmistakable. Every doubt I had pushed down surfaced, raw and jagged. The air in the room grew colder, the silence deeper. Clara's absence wasn't just an empty space tonight. It was the weight of a truth I had refused to see, staring back at me through the glow of my phone screen. And in that moment, I knew the life we had built was balanced on a lie. The following day arrived heavy and gray, a sky swollen with clouds that seemed to mirror the ache in my chest. I hadn't slept more than a few hours, my mind replaying the night's revelation in relentless loops. The phone bill app was still open on my screen when I woke up, the string of calls and texts to that Virginia number staring at me, daring me to make sense of it. Clara moved through the morning with a veneer of normalcy that I found infuriating. Her hair was pulled back in the usual sleek ponytail, makeup flawless, not a hint of remorse or guilt in her expression. She leaned over the counter, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. The urge to snatch it out of her hands was almost irresistible, but I bit my tongue, waiting, watching. I left for work early, using traffic as an excuse. The truth was I couldn't stand being in the same space as her, every glance a silent accusation she didn't know I was making. At the office, my mind wasn't on the day's agenda. Instead, I rehearsed what I knew and the questions I needed answers to. By mid-afternoon, I made a decision. I left work under the pretense of a meeting and drove home. The house sat quiet and unassuming, the curtains drawn, betraying nothing of the turmoil inside. My pulse raced as I let myself in, the silence immediately amplifying my tension. Clara wouldn't be home for hours, and I needed to use this time wisely. I headed for her workspace first, a small desk tucked in the corner of the living room. It was neat, almost obsessively so, no errant papers or pens, just her laptop and a leather-bound notebook. The notebook yielded nothing but meeting notes and lists, mundane reminders of her day-to-day. The laptop, though, was locked. I stared at the screen, the login prompt blinking like a silent challenge. My fingers hovered over the keys as I typed in the obvious choice, our wedding date. The screen stayed stubbornly locked. I tried her birth date next, then the name of our dog from years ago. With each failed attempt, frustration flared hotter. The thought of not finding anything gnawed at me. Just as I was about to close it, I remembered something, the password hint she had set for herself, once mentioned in passing, something unforgettable. I typed in the name of the cafe where we'd first kissed, and the screen flickered to life. Relief and dread battled within me as I navigated to her emails, sifting through work correspondences and newsletters. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a folder buried beneath others, labeled with a simple N. Opening it felt like stepping off a cliff. The emails were there, an endless thread of exchanges with someone named Nathaniel. They started innocuously, conversations about work events and projects, but the tone shifted, the words morphing into inside jokes, then thinly veiled flirtation, and finally, declarations that left no room for doubt. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. You looked stunning today, even more than usual. Wish I could have stayed longer. My throat tightened. This was it, proof not just of betrayal, but of an ongoing affair. My eyes skimmed over the messages, searching for timelines, places, trying to stitch together the months and lies into something coherent. The anger rose in waves, but alongside it came something sharper, clarity. I shut the laptop, the silence of the house now filled with the ghost of their whispered conversations, their shared secrets. The memories I had cherished, the laughter, the touches, even the nights where we lay side by side, silent but content, twisted into something grotesque. She had shared those same moments with him. As I sat there, the doorbell rang, jolting me back to the present. I wasn't expecting anyone. Heart pounding, I stood and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I recognized Paul, a friend from work. His expression was tense, brows knitted with worry. "Hey, Mark. Is everything all right?" he asked as I opened the door, glancing at me with concern. "You left early today, and you didn't answer my texts." I forced a smile that felt foreign on my face. "Yeah, just had some personal stuff to take care of." Paul nodded but didn't look convinced. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but if you need to talk. I appreciate it, really." My voice came out sharper than intended, and I softened it with a sigh. "Just dealing with some family issues. I'll be all right." He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded and stepped back. "Okay, but you know where to find me if that changes." The encounter felt surreal, a sudden intrusion of normalcy into the storm raging inside. As I closed the door, I felt a stab of guilt for shutting him out, but there were limits to how much I could share. This battle was mine alone, at least for now. The hours crept by, each minute marked by the clock's relentless ticking. When Clara finally came home, the air crackled with tension. She set her purse on the counter and glanced at me with a smile that seemed too wide, too forced. "How was your day?" she asked, slipping off her shoes and padding into the kitchen. I swallowed the knot in my throat, forcing a casual tone. "Same as always." It was a lie, a small prelude to the conversation I now knew was inevitable. But it wouldn't be tonight. Tonight, I needed more time, more control. Tonight, I would wait, because after everything I'd learned, the confrontation couldn't just be an outburst. It needed to be a reckoning. The days that followed were an exercise in controlled fury. I moved through life like an actor, playing the part of the oblivious husband while rehearsing every word, every expression I would use when the moment came. The mask I wore became both my prison and my shield, the anticipation gnawing at me, yet fueling me at the same time. Clara seemed unaware, wrapped in her own world of clandestine texts and feigned work calls. Every evening she would say she had another late meeting, and every time she did, I nodded with an expression that barely masked my disgust. The Virginia number was branded into my mind, a constant reminder that there was no mistaking this reality. On Friday, I decided that tonight would be the night. I had prepared everything, the quiet resolve, the proof printed and tucked neatly into a folder, the carefully selected words that would shatter the illusion once and for all. Clara's routine provided the perfect setup. She always came home late on Fridays, and tonight was no different. The clock struck 10 when I heard the familiar rumble of her car in the driveway. I sat at the kitchen table, the glow from the pendant light casting shadows that flickered like anxious thoughts. The folder was in front of me, closed but heavy with meaning. The front door opened, and Clara stepped in, carrying the faint scent of some floral perfume I knew wasn't hers. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she walked into the kitchen. She stopped when she saw me, surprise flitting across her features. "You're up late," she said, a smile playing on her lips. It faltered when she noticed the seriousness in my expression. "Yeah," I replied, my voice cold and measured. "I thought we should talk." She blinked, a flicker of confusion and something else, fear, crossed her face. "Talk? About what?" I slid the folder across the table, watching as her gaze dropped to it. "About this." Clara's eyes darted back to mine, wide now, pupils shrinking as realization set in. Slowly, she reached out and flipped the folder open. Page after page of printed emails and phone records lay there, a stark testament to her betrayal. She glanced at the pages, her face going pale, then looked back up at me. "Mark, she started, but I raised a hand to stop her. The room was so silent, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Don't," I said, the single word slicing through the tension like a knife. "I want to hear the truth, not another lie." Clara swallowed, her throat working visibly. She sat down, her movement slow, careful, as if sudden motion might shatter the fragile atmosphere. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Then what was it supposed to be, Clara?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. "Tell me how this happened. How we ended up here." She exhaled shakily, her eyes dropping to the table. "It started as, just a distraction. Things at work, the stress, it was overwhelming. And Nathaniel, he—" "Stop," I interrupted, the name like a poison on my tongue. "Don't justify it by blaming work or stress. You don't risk a marriage for a distraction." Her gaze snapped back to mine, and for the first time, there was defiance in her eyes. "And what about you, Mark? Always at work, always too tired or too busy. You think I didn't notice the way you withdrew, the way you started existing in our marriage instead of being in it?" I felt the sting of her words, but anger quickly smothered it. "So this is my fault now?" My voice was louder than intended, bouncing off the walls and reverberating through the kitchen. "Because I work to keep us afloat, to give us this life." "No, it's not your fault," she said, her tone softening. "But it's not black and white either. I felt invisible, Mark. I made a mistake, God, I know that. But it wasn't just about him. It was about feeling like someone saw me again." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her confession hung between us, a raw, jagged thing that neither of us knew how to handle. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. I needed space, air that didn't feel poisoned by the truth. I paced to the window, looking out at the quiet street lit by the amber glow of streetlights. Behind me, Clara's ragged breathing was the only sound. Finally, I turned to face her. "What now?" The question was as much for me as it was for her. I didn't know what I wanted her to say. Forgiveness felt impossible, yet the idea of walking away left a hollowness that echoed in my chest. Clara stood, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know," she admitted, voice trembling. "I don't know what comes next. But I do know that I'm sorry, Mark. More than I could ever say." "Sorry doesn't change anything," I said, my voice breaking. "It doesn't erase the months you spent lying to my face, the trust you shattered." She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was being the worst version of myself." The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to reply, but the words wouldn't come. The reality of her betrayal was a weight I wasn't sure I could bear, but there was something in her eyes, an earnestness that made me hesitate. A lifetime seemed to pass in that moment, the silence stretching until it frayed. I looked down at the folder on the table, the evidence of what had been done, and then at Clara, who stood there as if waiting for a verdict. I knew whatever came next would change everything. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a lattice of light across the room. I hadn't slept much after last night's confrontation. Every time I closed my eyes, Clara's tear-streaked face would haunt me, her whispered confessions tangling in my thoughts. Yet today, an odd stillness had settled in my chest, a numb acceptance of the chaos that had seeped into my life. I found Clara sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cupped in her hands. She looked exhausted, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. For a moment, she was just a woman in pain, not the person who had unraveled our marriage. The realization softened something in me, but only slightly. "Morning," I said, the word feeling fragile, like glass that could shatter under the weight of what hung between us. She looked up, a faint glimmer of surprise flickering in her eyes. "Morning." We stood in the silence, the kitchen air dense with unsaid words. I finally spoke. "We need to figure out where we go from here. This can't stay like this." Clara nodded, her gaze dropping to the coffee swirling in her mug. "I know. I've been thinking too. I'll pack some things and stay at my sister's for a while. We both need space." A part of me wanted to protest, to demand answers she hadn't given, but I knew she was right. I needed to think clearly, away from the constant, suffocating reminders of betrayal. "I think that's best," I replied, my voice steady despite the tumult inside. The next few hours were a blur. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, pulling clothes from the closet, stuffing them into a duffel bag. I watched her, trying to reconcile this version of my wife with the one I thought I knew. When she finished, she stood by the door, hesitating. "I'll call before I come to pick up the rest," she said, barely meeting my eyes. "Okay." Then, just as she was about to turn the knob, she paused. "Mark, for whatever it's worth. I do hope you'll find it in you to forgive me one day." The words hung in the air long after she walked out. The echo of the closing door reverberated through me like a final note in a song I hadn't wanted to hear. The days passed, turning into weeks. The house was too quiet, each room an echo of memories that refused to be silenced. Work kept me occupied, but it was a thin salve over a deep wound. I found myself combing through the folder again one night, flipping through the pages until one detail caught my eye, the phone number. Something gnawed at me, an instinct that hadn't dulled with time. I decided to call it. It rang twice before a voice answered, smooth and confident. "Hello." The voice wasn't one I recognized, but it was unmistakably male. I hesitated for a moment, then said, "This is Mark. You don't know me, but I know about you and Clara." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Oh, Mark. I was wondering when I'd hear from you." The familiarity in his tone made my skin prickle. "Who are you?" I asked, anger flaring in my chest. "I'm surprised she never told you," the man said, his voice carrying a smirk I could almost see. "I'm Nathaniel, but that's not what you should be worried about. What you should ask yourself is why Clara was drawn to me in the first place. Why don't you tell me?" I spat back, tired of the cryptic tone. "Because it wasn't about me," he said, suddenly serious. "It was never really about us at all. Clara, she was looking for a way out, Mark. But not from you." The words hit me like a slap. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You should check the bank statements, Mark," Nathaniel said, his voice low and almost sympathetic now. "Check them carefully. There's more to this than you think." Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, the silence more oppressive than ever. My heart thudded painfully as I hurried to the office, tearing through drawers until I found the statements. I spread them across the desk, eyes scanning line after line until I spotted it, transfers, regular ones, all to an account I didn't recognize. I logged into our joint banking app, my hands shaking as I searched for the account details. What I found made my stomach drop. The account was in my name, but I had never opened it. And the transfers were substantial, thousands of dollars over months, siphoned into this shadow account. A noise behind me made me turn. Clara stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you back," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of confusion and dread. "I came to get the rest of my things," she said quietly, then saw the papers scattered across the desk. Her eyes widened, and she knew. I could see it. The guilt, the realization that her secret was finally out. "You set this up," I said, each word laced with disbelief. "Why? Were you planning to leave with him and take everything?" Clara's eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't look away. "It wasn't like that," she said, voice breaking. "At first, it was a safety net. A way to make sure I had a way out if things ever went too far. But then you found out Nathaniel wasn't who you thought," I finished, piecing it together as I spoke. The affair had been more than a betrayal of love, it had been a cover for a plan that never came to fruition, a betrayal layered with lies upon lies. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He was just using me. By the time I realized it, I was in too deep." I stared at her, the weight of what she had done pressing down on me like a lead blanket. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been a lie, twisted and manipulated. "Get out," I whispered, my voice hoarse with a mixture of fury and grief. "And don't come back." Clara's shoulders sagged as she turned and walked out the door for the last time, leaving me alone with the ruins of our life and the hollow echo of a truth I never expected.